The morning Samuel Conroy found Inez Dawson collapsed in her cornfield, half-starved and too proud to ask for help, was the morning everything in his life quietly rearranged itself into something he had not seen coming. It was the autumn of 1874, deep in the hill country of Texas, where the land rolled in long amber waves, and the sky stretched so wide a man could lose himself just standing still and looking up at it. The town of Millhaven sat tucked between two limestone ridges, a modest collection of clapboard buildings, a general store that doubled as a post office, a church with a crooked steeple, and a saloon that stayed busier than the church on most days of the week. The people who lived out beyond the town limits were the farming kind, the ranching kind, the kind who measured success in rainfall and crop yields, and whether the cattle made it through winter without too many losses. Samuel Conroy was 31 years old and had been working the Conroy land since he was old enough to drag a plow. His father had passed 6 years prior, leaving the acreage to Samuel and his younger brother, Cole, who had since moved further west to try his luck in New Mexico. That left Samuel alone on the property, which was a fine stretch of land with a good well, a sturdy barn, and enough bottom soil to grow corn, sorghum, and sweet potatoes without too much persuasion. He was a tall man with broad shoulders that had been shaped by years of physical work, dark hair that curled slightly when it rained, and green eyes that had a habit of going very quiet when he was doing serious thinking. The people of Millhaven liked him well enough. He paid his debts on time, helped his neighbors when asked, and never caused trouble at the saloon. He was also, as several of the town's matchmaking women had noted with great interest, unmarried and showing no urgent signs of changing that particular status. The Dawson property sat directly east of his, separated by a low stone fence that someone had laid a long time ago and never fully finished. Thomas Dawson had built the house himself about 8 years back when he brought his young wife out from San Antonio. They had farmed cotton and kept a small vegetable garden, and by all accounts they had been happy. Thomas had died in the spring of that year from a fever that took him in under 2 weeks, fast and merciless as those fevers sometimes were. He left behind Inez, who was 27, their daughter Clara, who was 7, and a farm that was already struggling before he died and had been struggling harder since. Samuel had known Thomas Dawson the way neighbors know each other in rural Texas, well enough to wave from a distance, well enough to lend tools when asked, well enough to share news about weather and market prices. He had met Inez only a handful of times, always briefly, always with Thomas present. She was a quiet woman, or at least she had always seemed quiet to him. With dark brown hair she kept in a braid, steady dark eyes that noticed things, and a way of carrying herself that suggested she had been raised to stand her ground and had gotten plenty of practice doing it. When Thomas died, Samuel had sent over a covered dish with the rest of the community and had attended the funeral. He had not intruded after that because Inez Dawson did not invite intrusion. The word around Millhaven was that she was managing, and nobody pushed too hard on what managing actually meant. What it meant, as Samuel discovered on that bright October morning when he was checking the east fence line, was that she was not managing at all. He heard the sound first, a soft, exhausted noise that was half a groan and half a sigh, coming from somewhere low in the tall corn that grew along her side of the fence. He stopped walking and listened, and then he heard it again. He climbed the fence without thinking twice about it and pushed through 3 rows of corn stalks until he found her sitting on the ground with her knees drawn up and her forehead resting against them. She looked thin, dangerously thin, the kind of thin that did not happen in a week but built up slowly over months of not eating enough. "Mrs. Dawson," he said, keeping his voice even so as not to startle her. "It is Samuel Conroy, from next door." She lifted her head. Her face was pale beneath the sun-brown of her skin, and her eyes were glassy in a way that told him she had likely not eaten that day, possibly not the day before either. There was dirt on her hands and her apron and a long scratch on her forearm from a corn stalk, and she looked at him with an expression that was trying hard to be composed and not quite succeeding. "Mr. Conroy," she said, her voice was hoarser than he expected, "I am perfectly fine." "You are sitting on the ground in your cornfield," he said. "I am resting," she said. "How long have you been resting?" A pause. "A little while." He crouched down to her level, which felt more respectful than looming over her. "Mrs. Dawson, when did you last eat a proper meal?" She did not answer that, which was an answer in itself. He looked around at the cornfield. It was a small planting, probably no more than an acre, and it was not in good shape. The ears were undersized, the stalks spindly, the soil clearly in need of attention. He could see where she had been trying to harvest, the broken stalks and the small pile of ears she had managed to gather before she went down. The pile was not nearly enough to get her and Clara through a Texas winter. "I have got more harvest than I can use on my own this year," he said, which was true. It had been a genuinely good season. "I was going to let some of it go to rot rather than take it all to market. I wonder if you might do me the favor of taking some off my hands." She looked at him with those steady dark eyes, and he could see her thinking about whether to accept or refuse. Her pride was a living thing in her face. He watched it wrestle with her hunger and her fear, and he stayed very still and did not push. "That is kind of you," she said finally, and her voice was careful. "But I cannot take charity." "It is not charity," he said. "I have corn and sweet potatoes and more sorghum than I know what to do with. If you can take some of it, you would be helping me avoid waste. A man hates to see a good harvest go to rot." Another silence. The wind moved through the corn around them, and somewhere in the distance, a mockingbird was running through its entire repertoire with great enthusiasm. "Clara needs to eat," Inez said quietly, and there was something in those 4 words that was almost unbearable, the way they stripped away all the pride and left just a mother doing arithmetic on survival. "Then let me help," he said simply. She looked at him for a long moment, and he met her gaze and did not look away and did not make it into anything more than what it was, a neighbor offering what he had to someone who needed it. Something in her shoulders came down, a fraction of the held tension releasing. "All right," she said. "Thank you, Mr. Conroy." He helped her to her feet, and she accepted the assistance without comment. He walked her back to the fence, retrieved the small basket of corn she had already gathered, carried it to her porch steps, and then went back to his own property to begin loading what he could spare. He brought 2 sacks of corn, a bushel of sweet potatoes, dried sorghum, a wheel of the hard cheese he had gotten in trade from the Hollies farm, and a side of cured ham that was more than he needed for the winter. He loaded it all into his wagon and drove it around to her front gate, and when Clara came running out with wide dark eyes that looked exactly like her mother's, he felt something in the middle of his chest do a small, quiet thing he was not prepared to examine too closely. Clara was a serious little girl with 2 braids and a missing front tooth, and a manner that suggested she had been thinking very hard about the world for most of her 7 years. She studied him with frank assessment. "Are you the man who lives on the other side of the fence?" she asked. "I am," he said. "Mama says you work very hard," she said. "I try to," he said. "She says that is the most important thing about a person," Clara said, and then ran back inside to tell Inez he was there, which Inez already knew because she had been watching from the window. He unloaded everything onto the porch with Inez's help, and when he was done, she stood with her hands clasped in front of her and looked at the provisions with an expression that moved through gratitude and relief, and something complicated he did not try to name. "I do not know how to repay this," she said. "There is nothing to repay," he said, "though if you ever find yourself with an excess of anything you cannot use, I would not say no to a trade." She almost smiled at that. It was not quite a full smile, more like the beginning of one, the corners of her mouth moving in a direction that suggested the possibility of smiling was not entirely foreign to her, just out of practice. "I will remember that," she said. He tipped his hat and drove back home. He thought about her that evening while he was eating supper, which was a habit he had not intended to form and which established itself anyway with complete disregard for his intentions. He thought about the way she had looked sitting in that cornfield, trying to hold herself together on will alone. He thought about Clara's serious little face and those inherited dark eyes. He thought about what it meant to be alone on a failing farm with a child to feed and winter coming, and he felt the weight of it the way he imagined she must feel it every single day. He told himself he was being neighborly. Texas Hill Country ran on neighborliness. It was a practical matter, nothing romantic about it, no reason to read anything into the fact that he had found himself wondering what she thought about things, what she was like before grief and hardship had pared her down to pure function. He was just being a decent neighbor. That was all. He believed this for approximately 3 days. On the 4th day, he found a reason to go back. He had been fixing a stretch of fence near the property line and had found, tucked against one of the old posts, a small leather-handled knife that was not his. He held it in his hand and turned it over and told himself he was just returning lost property, which was also true, and went to her door. She answered before he could knock a second time, wearing a plain brown dress and an expression of mild surprise that rearranged itself quickly into something more neutral. "Mr. Conroy," she said. "Found this near the fence line," he said, holding out the knife. "Thought it might be yours." She looked at it and something passed over her face. "It was Thomas's," she said. "He must have lost it out there last spring." She took it from him and held it in both hands, not the way you hold something to examine it, but the way you hold something that means something. "I am sorry," he said, and he meant it in all the ways you can mean that particular phrase. "Thank you for returning it," she said, and then instead of closing the door, she stepped back slightly. "Clara has been asking about you. Would you like to come in for coffee? I have some left from this morning. It would be no trouble to heat it." He should have said no. He had work to get back to. There was always work to get back to on a farm in autumn. He said yes. The inside of her house was small and worn but clean, and she had made it as comfortable as she could with what she had. There were 2 chairs at the kitchen table, a braided rug on the floor, a few dried wildflowers in a clay pot on the windowsill. There were drawings on the wall that Clara had made, mostly horses and something that might have been a dog, all rendered with great enthusiasm and limited precision. There was a Bible on the shelf and a primer for Clara's lessons and a few other books, which surprised him, and which he realized immediately it should not have surprised him. There was no reason at all to be surprised that she had books. He sat at the table and she heated the coffee, and Clara materialized from somewhere in the back of the house and climbed into the other chair and fixed him with that considering gaze. "Do you have any animals?" Clara asked. "A few horses," he said. "Some chickens, 3 milk cows." "We had a cow," Clara said. "She died." "Clara," Inez said quietly from the stove. "She did though," Clara said, not complainingly, just factually. "Her name was Bess." "I remember Bess," Samuel said. "Your father used to mention her." Clara seemed satisfied with this. "Papa said she was the best cow in the county," she said. "I think he was right." The coffee was strong and slightly bitter, and exactly what he needed, and he sat at that table and talked to Inez Dawson for the first time without Thomas present, and without crisis making the conversation necessary, and what he discovered was that she was not a quiet person at all. She was a thoughtful person, which was different. She chose her words the way a careful carpenter chooses wood, for soundness and purpose. She had opinions about farming and about books, and about the way the town council handled road maintenance, and she expressed them directly when asked without hedging them into softness. She had grown up in San Antonio, the daughter of a Mexican mother and an Anglo father who ran a small but prosperous dry goods business. She had grown up between languages and cultures, comfortable in neither and conversant in both, and that in-between quality had given her a kind of clarity about people that Samuel found quietly remarkable. He stayed for an hour and a half, which was longer than he had meant to, and when he left he walked home in the thin October light feeling like a man who had been asleep for some time and was only now becoming aware of it. He came back 3 days later with a genuine reason that time. He had gone to town and picked up her mail by accident along with his own. The postmaster was getting absent-minded in his old age. She thanked him and invited him in again, and he stayed for supper, which she cooked from the provisions he had brought, and which was a simple meal, beans and cornbread, and the last of some preserved peaches she had put up in the summer. It was one of the best suppers he had eaten in years, though he suspected that had more to do with the company than the cooking. Clara fell asleep at the table before the meal was finished, the way children do, all at once and without negotiation. Inez lifted her daughter and carried her to the back room with the practiced ease of a mother who had done it 1,000 times, and when she came back out, she poured them both another cup of coffee and sat down across from him, and they talked until the fire burned low. They talked about the harvest, about what the next season might look like if the rains came right, about whether the railroad would ever push further into this part of Texas, and what that would mean for prices and markets. They talked about San Antonio, about what it had been like there when she was young. She described the river and the missions and the way the city smelled in summer, and her voice went warm when she talked about it, the only time he had heard it go truly warm, and he thought about what it must have meant to leave that behind for a farm out in the hills. "Did you want to come here?" he asked. It was more personal than he usually went, and he almost took it back, but she did not seem to mind it. "I wanted to be wherever Thomas was," she said. "So yes, I wanted to come here." She said it simply, without sentimentality, just as a true thing, and the honesty of it moved him. "He was a good man," Samuel said. "He was," she agreed. "He was not perfect. He was stubborn, and sometimes his judgment was not as good as he thought it was, and he had a terrible habit of leaving his boots exactly where anyone might trip over them." She paused. "But he was a good man. He was kind to Clara, and he worked hard, and he loved me as well as he knew how." Samuel looked down at his coffee cup. "You have done a remarkable thing, keeping this farm going without him." "I have not done a particularly remarkable job of it," she said. "You found me in a heap in my own cornfield." "You were having a bad day," he said. "Even remarkable people have those." She looked at him with a slightly startled expression, as though the statement had landed somewhere unexpected, and then she looked away and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear in a gesture that was both small and entirely devastating in the way small gestures sometimes are. He went home that night and had a long, honest conversation with himself about what he was doing and what he wanted, and by the time he went to bed, he had admitted to himself that it was probably more than neighborliness. Which was fine, people felt things. That did not mean he needed to do anything about it, particularly when she was still inside a grief that was less than a year old, and when acting on it would almost certainly make things uncomfortable between them, and he had to live next door to her for the rest of his foreseeable life. He decided to be a good neighbor and not be a fool about it. This resolution lasted through November with remarkable discipline on his part. He came over regularly through that month, partly because there was always a legitimate reason, something to fix or deliver or return, and partly because his farm work kept him close to the fence line more often than it had previously. He helped her repair the roof of the small outbuilding behind her house, which had been leaking since summer. He lent her his draft horse for 2 days when she needed to break ground for a winter garden. He showed Clara how to identify which berries in the trees along the creek were safe and which were not, and Clara received this instruction with an expression of absolute gravitas, as though she were being trained for something important. Inez baked him a pie at some point in all this, a sweet potato pie with a perfectly executed crust, and left it on his porch with a note that said simply, for the horse days, "Thank you, ID." He ate half of it for supper and thought about the handwriting, which was neat and forward-slanting, and told him nothing except that she had been properly schooled. He put the note in his shirt pocket for no reason he was prepared to explain. In town, people started talking. Small towns in 1874 ran on observation and inference, and the people of Millhaven were very good at both. Mrs. Horton at the general store made a comment to him about how it was kind of him to look in on the Dawson widow. The blacksmith, Pete Callahan, raised an eyebrow when Samuel came in for horseshoe supplies and mentioned he had been over at the Dawson place 3 times that week. His friend Gideon Walsh, who ran sheep on the other side of the ridge and had an absolutely boundless interest in other people's personal lives, rode over one afternoon and asked with great casualness whether there was anything interesting happening on the east property line. Samuel told him it was none of his business, and Gideon grinned and said that was confirmation enough for him. The complication arrived in December in the form of a man named Harlan Briggs. Harlan Briggs was a land agent out of Austin who had been buying up struggling farms all through the hill country for 2 years. He was 40 years old, well-dressed in a city way that looked slightly out of place among working cattle country, and he had a good line of talk and a bad habit of appearing at people's properties at inconvenient moments. He showed up at Inez's front gate on a Wednesday morning when Samuel happened to be there helping her repair a section of broken fence at the front of her property. Samuel watched Briggs ride up and tip his hat with elaborate politeness, watched him dismount and look around the property with eyes that were doing financial calculations, and felt a slow, cold dislike settle in his stomach. "Mrs. Dawson," Briggs said pleasantly. "Harlan Briggs from the Briggs Land Development Company. I wrote you a letter in October." "I received it," Inez said. "I did not reply to it." "I noticed that," Briggs said, still pleasant. "I thought I might come out personally to make sure you understood the offer. It is a fair price for land in this condition." "I understand the offer," she said. "The answer is no." Briggs glanced at Samuel with polite dismissal, the kind of glance that puts a person in a category and moves past them. "I wonder if you have thought through all your options, Mrs. Dawson. The farm has not been productive, and with winter coming on, you have got real carrying costs, and a woman alone with a child." "The lady said no," Samuel said. He was not loud about it. He kept his voice level and his hands easy at his sides, but something in the quality of the statement stopped Briggs mid-sentence. Briggs looked at him more carefully this time. "Mr. Conroy," Samuel said. "Samuel Conroy, the neighboring property." "Mr. Conroy," Briggs said, "this is a private business conversation." "Any business conversation on this property is Mrs. Dawson's business," Samuel said. "And she has given you her answer." There was a moment where Briggs was deciding something, and then he decided not to press it, which was wise. He made a small performance of being gracious about it, saying the offer would remain open, and remounted and rode away with his dignity mostly intact. Inez watched him go. When the sound of the horse had faded down the road, she let out a slow breath and turned to look at Samuel with an expression that was complicated. "That is the 3rd time he has come," she said. "He came twice before when you were not here." "He has no right to pressure you," Samuel said. "He has no right," she agreed. "He is doing it anyway." She paused. "He is not wrong that I am struggling. The farm is not producing what I need it to. I have been thinking about it." He looked at her. "Are you thinking about selling?" "I am thinking about not having a choice," she said, and her voice was even but her jaw was set in a way that told him she hated saying it. He turned back to the fence and worked a post for a moment while he thought. Then he said, "Could I ask you something?" "You can ask," she said. "Would you let me help you fix the soil on the south field? The acidity is wrong, that is why your corn was struggling. If you lime it properly this winter you could have a decent yield next spring. And I know you are short on seed, but I have more than I can plant and you are welcome to whatever you can use." She was quiet for a moment. "Why are you doing all of this?" He stopped working on the fence and turned to face her. She was watching him with those direct, dark eyes, and she was asking a real question, not a rhetorical one, and she deserved a real answer. "Because you are my neighbor and you are in a hard spot," he said, "and because I think you are worth helping." He paused. "And because I have been coming over here for 2 months and I would rather keep coming over here than not." The honesty of it landed between them like something physical. She absorbed it without looking away, and he did not look away either, and the winter air around them was very still. "That is very direct," she said finally. "I thought you would prefer that," he said. Another pause. "I do," she said. "I prefer directness." She looked down at the fence post they had been working on. "I think the soil is salvageable with the right treatment. You would know better than I do about the liming." "We can work it out together," he said. She picked up the tool she had set down and went back to work on the fence. But something had changed. Some angle between them had shifted by a few degrees, and they both knew it, and neither of them made a production of it, which was exactly right. The winter of 1874 into 1875 was a working winter, the kind where the cold was not brutal enough to stop everything but sharp enough to make you feel it. Samuel and Inez established a rhythm that was neither purely neighborly nor anything that could be easily named, and they both found the unnameable nature of it comfortable for the time being. He came over most mornings to help with the heavier work, the fence repairs, the wood splitting, the application of agricultural lime to the south field, which was a cold and unpleasant job that he insisted on doing most of himself while she mixed and measured. She brought him coffee and sometimes worked beside him, and sometimes went back inside to tend to Clara's lessons. Clara was being educated at home because the school in Millhaven was a 4-mile ride in each direction, and the weather made it impractical in winter. Inez taught her reading and arithmetic and geography, and she was rigorous about it in a way that made Samuel think she had strong feelings about education. He mentioned this once, and she said that her mother had not been permitted to attend school when she was a girl, not the schools that were available, and that this was something she thought about often. He thought about what she had not said directly, the injustice underneath that quiet statement, the specific way the world had been arranged to refuse certain people what it gave freely to others, and the fact that Inez had grown up in the space between two worlds, knowing exactly how the accounting worked. He thought it explained some of the quality he admired most in her, that unsentimental, clear-eyed way she had of looking at things, born of knowing that you could not afford to look at the world as better than it was. One evening in January, he stayed for supper after a particularly long day of work on the barn roof, which had developed its own ambitions to let in the sky. Inez made stew from the dried beans and the last of the cured ham, with cornbread on the side, and Clara set the table with the 3 plates arranged at precise right angles with a 7-year-old's dedication to symmetry. After supper, while Inez cleaned up, Clara produced a book she had been reading and demanded that Samuel read to her from it, which he did, a chapter about explorers traveling in South America, while Clara leaned against his arm and fell asleep again with the same sudden completeness as before. Inez came out from the kitchen and looked at them with an expression he was not supposed to see, soft and careful and something else, and when she realized he had seen it, she did not look embarrassed about it, just shifted into the steady directness he had come to know well. "She does not do that with everyone," Inez said. "Fall asleep on them." "I am flattered," he said quietly so as not to wake Clara. "You should be," she said. "She is a fair judge of character." He carried Clara to bed at Inez's direction, and laid her down with careful hands, and pulled the quilt up, and stood for a moment looking at that sleeping face with the missing tooth, and the 2 braids coming half undone from the day. There was something about a sleeping child that rearranged your insides whether you had any business being rearranged or not. When he came back out, Inez was sitting in the chair by the fire, and she had poured 2 cups of coffee and set them on the small table between the chairs. He sat in the other chair, and they were quiet for a while in the firelight, the kind of quiet that is its own form of comfort, that does not need to be filled. "I think about staying here," she said after a while, "about whether it is possible, about whether I am just too stubborn to see clearly or whether it actually is possible." "What do you think?" he asked. "I think the land is good," she said. "If the soil can be brought back, I think I know more than Thomas gave me credit for about running a farm." He was not the kind of man who thought women knew much about that sort of thing. She said it without bitterness, just as a fact. "But I do. My mother had a kitchen garden that fed half the neighborhood, and she knew more about growing things than anyone I ever met. "The south field is going to come back," he said. "I would stake money on it." She looked at him sideways. "You are very confident about my soil." "I have been looking at it for 2 months," he said. "I know that field." "You know my field better than I do," she said, and there was something slightly amused in her voice, the beginning of that almost smile he had gotten used to watching for. "I have some advantages," he said. "I can see it from my side of the fence." The almost smile came fully to life then, and it was, he thought, one of the best things he had seen in recent memory. It changed her whole face, opened it up, made visible something that the serious, composed expression usually kept contained. "Mr. Conroy," she said, still smiling slightly, "I think you might be on my side of the fence more than your own at this point." "Possibly," he agreed. The fire cracked and shifted. Outside, the winter wind moved around the corners of the house with a low sound. "Samuel," she said. It was the first time she had used his given name, and they both noticed it. "I want to tell you something." "All right," he said. "I am grateful for everything you have done," she said. "And I am not in the habit of being grateful in a way that does not account for what a thing actually is. What you have done for us this winter is not a small thing. It may be the difference between staying and going." She paused. "And I am aware that your reasons for coming over here have been not entirely limited to neighborly concern." He kept his eyes on the fire. "I have tried not to make it uncomfortable," he said. "You have not made it uncomfortable," she said. "That is what I wanted to say. You have not pressed or assumed or made it into anything I was not ready for, and I noticed that. And I want you to know that I noticed it." He looked at her then. She was looking back at him with those steady eyes, and the firelight was doing things to the angles of her face, and his heart was doing something complicated in his chest. "It would not have been right," he said. "You have been through a hard thing." "I have been through a hard thing," she agreed. "I am still going through it. I probably will be for some time, but I am not made of glass, Samuel. I am not going to break if someone is kind to me in a way that goes beyond neighborliness." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "In the spring, if the field comes back the way I think it will, would you let me take you and Clara to town for supper at the hotel dining room, as a celebration?" She looked at him, and there was something bright in her expression, something like possibility. "I think I would like that very much," she said. He went home that night walking like a man who had just been given something extraordinary for free, which was precisely how he felt. February came in hard and then went out gentle, the way Texas months sometimes gambled with the weather. Samuel and Inez worked the south field through the cold weeks, turning and treating the soil until it was ready for spring planting. They planted together in March, working the rows side by side from early morning until the light went thin in the afternoons, and Clara helped too with solemn dedication, carrying the seed bag and patting the soil down over each planted row with both hands, very seriously, as though she were blessing it. The town of Millhaven was paying close attention to this partnership. Mrs. Horton at the general store mentioned it to everyone who came in. The preacher, a sensible man named Reverend Galt, who had seen enough of human nature to be charitable about most of it, made a general remark about community and mutual support during his Sunday sermon that everyone understood was about Samuel and Inez, and most people in the pews felt warmly about it. Not everyone felt warmly. There was a woman named Patricia Elwood, the wife of the town's wealthiest rancher, who had a daughter in her 20s. She had been angling to have noticed by Samuel Conroy for several years. Patricia Elwood made a number of carefully worded comments around town about the impropriety of a young widow entertaining a man unchaperoned, and about the importance of people knowing their station, which was a multi-layered comment that Millhaven mostly had the grace to ignore. Inez heard about the comments through the interconnected system of information that small towns run on, and her response when Samuel mentioned them carefully to her was a cool, unimpressed look, and the observation that Patricia Elwood had too much time on her hands and not enough productive use for it. Samuel found this response enormously satisfying. The spring supper at the hotel dining room happened in April, when the field was planted, and the first green shoots were just beginning to show. Inez put on the nicest dress she owned, which was a deep blue wool that had seen better days but fit her well and suited her coloring remarkably. Clara wore a dress with a white collar and her hair in two very tight braids, and sat at the table in the hotel dining room with the expression of someone attending a very important state occasion. Samuel wore his good jacket and his cleanest shirt, and spent an embarrassing amount of time on his appearance before leaving the house, a fact he would have denied categorically if asked. The hotel dining room was the finest establishment in Millhaven, which meant it had tablecloths and candles, and a menu that ran to 3 items for supper on any given evening. They had roast beef and potatoes and green beans cooked with bacon, and Clara had a glass of lemonade that she treated with appropriate reverence, and the conversation ran easily and warmly from farming to books to the geography lessons. Clara was studying, and her strong opinions about the size of Brazil relative to the United States, which she had not known until recently and found deeply surprising. Halfway through supper, Inez looked across the table at him with an expression that was quiet and sure and said, "This is very nice." He looked back at her. "It is," he said. "I had forgotten," she said, "that things could be nice." He reached across the table and touched the back of her hand briefly, just his fingertips against her knuckles. She turned her hand over and her fingers closed lightly around his for a moment. Clara, who was busy with her lemonade, did not see it, or if she did she was too tactful to comment. He walked them home in the spring evening, Clara between them holding one hand of each, swinging slightly, narrating the stars with remarkable authority for someone whose star knowledge was, he suspected, largely theoretical. When they reached her gate, Clara ran ahead to the porch and Inez stopped at the gate and turned to him. "Thank you," she said. "The pleasure was entirely mine," he said. She looked at him in the soft evening light and said, "You are a good man, Samuel Conroy." "I am trying to be," he said. "You do not have to try that hard," she said quietly. "It seems to come fairly naturally to you." He wanted very much to kiss her and he did not, because Clara was 12 feet away on the porch and because some things deserved the right moment. But he held her gaze and she held his, and the moment between them was its own kind of intimacy, complete and warm and full of what was not yet said. May came and the field was growing. Samuel stood at his fence line in the early mornings and looked at her corn coming up straight and green from the amended soil, and he felt a satisfaction about it that went well beyond what a man could reasonably feel about someone else's corn. He had started to understand that the things that were hers were beginning to matter to him the way his own things mattered, which was information. They had supper together 3 times a week by then, rotating between the 2 properties, and Inez had met his horses properly and had an easy way with them that he noticed with approval. He met her in town one Saturday morning, and they did their supply shopping together, which was not remarkable except that Gideon Walsh happened to see it and reported to the rest of their social circle with great enthusiasm that they were looking at flour sacks together, and it was something to behold. It was in May that Harlan Briggs came back. He came on a Tuesday when Samuel was not there, which was not an accident. He came with a new offer that was 15% higher than the last one and a great deal more pressure, and Inez sent him away again without agreeing to anything. She told Samuel about it that evening with a controlled fury in her voice that he found both admirable and slightly alarming. He said, she said, cutting her bread with more force than bread required, that he did not see how a woman alone could expect to make a go of it, that he was doing me a kindness by offering before the farm fell apart entirely, that it was only a matter of time. "He is wrong," Samuel said. "I know he is wrong," she said. "My field is growing, I know it is growing, but he has got seed of doubt in him the way a man like that does, and I do not like it." "He is bluffing," Samuel said. "He wants the land cheap and he is trying to make you believe you have no option so you will sell at his price, but you have got a good crop coming in. You do not need to sell anything." She set her bread down and looked at him. "What if he keeps coming?" Then we will keep sending him away, Samuel said. Together. The word fell into the space between them, and they both heard the weight of it. Together, she repeated, and there was something in her voice he had not heard before, something that was testing the word, turning it over. If you are willing, he said. She was quiet for a long moment. The kitchen was warm and the lamp was burning, and Clara was in the back room at her lessons, and outside the May evening was blue and soft. Samuel, she said carefully, I need to be clear with you about something. Tell me, he said. I am not going to be someone who depends on a man to save her, she said. That is not who I am. If this farm comes back, it will come back because I worked it and because I made the right decisions, not because someone else did it for me. I know that, he said. I need you to know that I know my own mind, she continued. I know what I feel and what I want. I am not confused by grief or loneliness into thinking I feel something I do not. When I tell you that I value what we have built here, I mean it clearly, and I have thought about it carefully. He felt something expand in his chest. I know that too, he said. Good, she said. Then I am also going to tell you that I have thought carefully about the fact that I look forward to you coming over here. That when you are here, things are better. That I think about you when you are not here, which is information I did not entirely plan to share, but there it is. He looked at her across the table, and he thought that she was without question the most remarkable person he had met in his 31 years of meeting people. I think about you when I am not here too, he said. I have been doing it since October. It started when I found you in the cornfield. She made a slightly undignified noise. That is a dreadful way to start caring about someone. You were holding yourself together with nothing but determination, he said. It was not dreadful. It was, he searched for the right word. It was the most real thing I had ever seen. She looked at him, and he could see her absorbing that, taking it in and weighing it. And then she said, Come and sit in the other room with me after supper. There is no reason to sit at the kitchen table every time you are here. It was not a declaration of love, and it was not a kiss, and it was exactly right. He came and sat in the parlor with her after supper, and they talked and read and sometimes were quiet. And at the end of the evening, when he stood to leave, she walked him to the door, and they stood in the doorway in the warm May night, and he looked at her face in the lamplight and said, May I? She looked at him steadily. Yes, she said. He kissed her gently, carefully, and she kissed him back with both certainty and feeling. And when they stepped back, there was a kind of clear, ringing quiet between them, the way the air feels after a bell has just stopped sounding. Good night, Samuel, she said. Good night, Inez, he said. He walked home through the dark Texas night with his heart doing something it had not done before, or not in this particular combination of ways, warm and sure and wide awake, and completely without anxiety for once. He was 31 years old, and he had finally, definitively, figured out where he wanted to be. The summer of 1875 was the summer the Dawson South field produced the best corn on either side of the stone fence, which was the sort of outcome that makes a person feel the world can occasionally be trusted to do the right thing. The stalks came up tall and thick, and the ears were full and heavy, and when the first ears were ready to pull, Inez walked out into that field in the early morning and stood among the green stalks and ran her hand down one of them, and the expression on her face was something Samuel had the privilege of witnessing from the fence line. He did not interrupt it. Some moments are private even when witnessed. Clara turned 8 that summer and received as her birthday present a small roan pony that Samuel brought over with a red ribbon around its neck, which was possibly the best single moment of Clara's entire 8 years up to that point. She named the pony Cornelius, which was an extraordinarily large name for a small horse, and Samuel did not comment on this because it seemed to be exactly the right name for the pony's dignity. Harlan Briggs came one final time in June, and this time Samuel was there on the porch with Inez when he rode up, and he did not have to say anything because Inez handled it herself with a calm and complete authority that left absolutely no room for further negotiation. She told Briggs that the farm was not for sale, that it was not going to be for sale, and that she had a crop in the ground and a solid season ahead of her, and she would appreciate his respect for her answer as a final one. Briggs looked between her and Samuel and did the arithmetic and tipped his hat and rode away and did not come back. "That was beautifully done," Samuel said. "I have been practicing that speech since May," she admitted, and smiled, and it was the full version of the smile, the one that opened up her whole face, and he thought he would work hard for the rest of his life to see that smile as often as possible. Samuel had been having a conversation with himself all summer about what he wanted to say and how to say it. He was not a man who did things impulsively, but he was also not a man who needed infinite time to be sure of what was already clear to him. He had been sure for months. He was waiting for the right moment, partly from an instinct about timing and partly because he wanted to be certain that Inez had had time to be as clear and certain in herself as she had told him she was. He asked Gideon Walsh for advice on the subject, which was a mistake he recognized immediately upon making it, because Gideon's advice was to buy her the biggest ring in the Millhaven General Store, which was a small amber-colored stone in a setting that Samuel privately considered ostentatious and not at all right for Inez. He thanked Gideon and ignored the advice. He rode to San Antonio in August. He told Inez he needed to see a man about a seed contract, which was true, though it was not the primary reason for the trip. The primary reason was that he wanted to find something specific in the jeweler's shop on Commerce Street that he had heard about from a fellow cattleman who had bought his wife's ring there. He found what he was looking for: a simple gold band with a single small turquoise stone set flush in the metal, unpretentious and beautiful and exactly right. He also brought back a bolt of fabric in green calico that he thought would suit Inez, which he presented as a gift from his travels, and a carved wooden horse for Clara that was considerably more refined than anything Millhaven's General Store could offer. Clara declared the horse to be Cornelius's miniature cousin and named him Cornelius Jr. on the spot. The harvest came in September, and it was good, genuinely good. The kind of harvest that meant there would be money to carry through winter and seed money for the next spring. Samuel and Inez brought both their harvests in together, working the fields from morning to night for a week, with Clara helping in the ways available to an 8-year-old and Gideon Walsh riding over 2 days to lend extra hands without being asked, which was the kind of friend Gideon was despite his considerable enthusiasm for other people's romantic situations. On the last evening of the harvest, when the wagons were loaded and the fields were done, and the crickets were singing in the early September dark, Samuel and Inez sat on the fence between their properties looking at the result of a whole year's work together. The air smelled of dust and dried corn silk and the faint sweetness of ripened sorghum. Clara was inside already, asleep the minute her head had touched the pillow, the way a child who has worked an honest day sleeps. "Well," Inez said, "we did it." "You did it," he said. "Your field, your harvest." "Our work," she said firmly. "I am not going to let you be falsely modest about it." He smiled. "All right, our work." She looked at the dark fields, at the star-scattered sky above, at the good solid evidence of what could be built when things were given the right care and the right conditions. She had come so far from that morning in October when he had found her on the ground, and the distance she had traveled had been measured in stubbornness and early mornings and things that hurt and things that helped, and slowly, carefully, something she had not gone looking for. He reached into his pocket. "Inez," he said. She looked at him. "I have been thinking about this since November," he said, "which means I have thought about it carefully enough that I am not going to run out of certainty about it. I want to spend my life on the other side of that fence from you, and on this side of it, and on whatever side of it you are on at any given moment." He paused. "That is a very long way of asking if you will marry me." He opened his hand. The ring sat in his palm, the gold warm in the moonlight, the turquoise the color of deep river water. She looked at the ring and then at him, and her expression went through several things in rapid succession that he was privileged to witness: surprise and recognition and warmth and something bright and deep that was the feeling arriving to claim its name. "You went to San Antonio for a seed contract," she said. "I went to San Antonio for a seed contract and for that ring," he said. "Both were necessary trips." She looked at him for a long moment and he looked back, steady and sure, and let her look. "Clara is going to want to be involved in the wedding planning," she said. "I want to warn you about that now. She will have opinions about everything. She already has opinions about everything." "I would not have it any other way," he said. "Samuel," she said, and her voice was warm and certain. "Yes, I will marry you." He slid the ring onto her finger, and she looked at it in the moonlight with the expression of someone who had not entirely expected to have this again. Not this particular combination of feeling sure and being loved and knowing it was right. He put his arm around her, and she leaned against him on the fence between their properties, and they sat together in the September dark with the stars overhead and the harvest done and everything ahead of them. He kissed her in the moonlight, and she kissed him back fully, without qualification, and when they separated, she pressed her forehead briefly against his shoulder in a gesture that was so unguarded and so trusting that he felt it in his chest like a chord resolving. "I should go in," she said eventually. "I know," he said. She did not move immediately. He did not either. "Soon enough," she said. "You will not have to go home every evening." "That thought had occurred to me," he said, and she laughed, a real laugh, warm and unguarded, and it was the best sound the September night had to offer. They were married in November, 1 year and 1 month from the morning he had found her in the cornfield, which felt like exactly the right amount of time. The ceremony was at the Millhaven Church with Reverend Galt officiating, and approximately half the town present because word had gotten around, and Millhaven took a proprietary interest in this particular wedding. Clara was the self-appointed primary organizer of the floral arrangements, which consisted of late autumn wild flowers and dried lavender from Inez's garden, arranged with dedicated intensity. She wore her dress with the white collar and stood next to her mother during the ceremony with the expression of someone supervising an important event and wanting to make sure it was done correctly. Gideon Walsh cried during the ceremony, which he denied afterward with great vigor, and no one believed. Mrs. Horton from the general store brought a cake she had been planning for 2 months. Even Reverend Galt seemed unusually moved. When Samuel put the wedding band on her finger alongside the turquoise ring, and Reverend Galt told him he could kiss his bride, he did so with a tenderness that made several people in the pews put their hands over their hearts without meaning to. They came out of the church into the cold, bright November day, and Inez took his arm and Clara took his other hand, and he thought that if you had told him a year ago that this is what his November would look like, he would have said that was more than a man had a right to expect. And it would have been true, and it would also have been wrong, because sometimes the world delivers exactly what is needed to exactly the right people at exactly the right time, and all you have to do is be standing in the right field at the right moment and notice what is there. They combined the two properties, merging the farms into one working operation that was significantly stronger than either had been alone. Samuel's side had the better well and the established livestock, and Inez's south field had proved itself capable of good production with proper soil management. And between the two, they had enough land to grow diversified crops that could weather a bad year in any one thing. It was practical and smart, and also it meant that they could stop climbing the fence between the properties, which had been wearing on Samuel's hat brim all year. They moved Samuel's things into Inez's house because her house was in better repair, and because Clara was already established in the room she had been in since she was a baby, and there was no reason to uproot her. Samuel's house became the bunkhouse and storage building, a solid use that would serve them well when the work expanded. The first winter of their marriage was the best winter Samuel could recall in years, not because it was easy, because winter on a Texas hill country farm was never exactly easy, but because there is a specific quality to hard work when you come in at the end of the day to warmth and company, and someone who is genuinely glad to see you. He had been coming home to an empty house for 6 years, and he had not understood how deeply he had been hungry for exactly this until he had it. Inez was a remarkable person to be married to. She was not soft in the easy ways. She did not flatter or defer or smooth things over when smoothing over was not warranted, and she held to her own judgment with a firmness that he had respected before marriage and found even more valuable within it. They disagreed sometimes about planting decisions and about money, and once, memorably, about whether the new milk cow was worth the price the Hollies farm was asking, and their disagreements were direct and complete and resolved without either of them saying anything they did not mean or harboring anything afterward. It was the most honest relationship Samuel had ever been in with another person. She was also unexpectedly funny. It was a dry, understated humor that emerged without announcement in the middle of ordinary things, and it consistently caught him off guard in the best way. She would say something quiet and precise in the middle of supper, and he would be halfway through his next thought before the full effect arrived, and he would burst out laughing, and she would look at him with the particular satisfaction of someone who has landed a joke exactly right. Clara adapted to the new arrangement, with the practical acceptance that children sometimes display toward changes they have secretly been hoping for. She began calling him Samuel, which she had always done, but with a different quality now, more proprietary, the way she might say my horse or my book, with the addition of a kind of confidence that suggested a settled mind. She informed him at breakfast one morning in December that she had decided to study medicine when she grew up. He looked at her over his coffee. "Is that right?" he said. "I read about a woman who became a doctor," Clara said. "Elizabeth Blackwell. Mama has a book about her." "She is right," Inez said from the stove without looking up. "I have the book." "There are not many women doctors," Clara said. "But Mama says that is because the world has not caught up yet, not because it cannot be done." "Your mother is right," Samuel said. Clara nodded with finality. "I know," she said. "She usually is." Inez turned from the stove with a look of maternal exasperation softened entirely by love. Spring of 1876 came and they planted together again, and the farm ran the way a well-built thing runs, with the satisfaction of designed purpose. Gideon Walsh came to help during the planting and brought his new wife, a cheerful woman named Rose who had arrived in Millhaven to visit a cousin and never left. And Rose and Inez took to each other immediately in the way of two women who find in each other exactly the combination of frankness and warmth they have been looking for in a friend. Samuel wrote to his brother Cole in New Mexico that spring, a longer letter than he usually sent, telling him about the marriage and the farm and Clara and the South Field and all of it. And Cole wrote back a letter that was enthusiastic and genuinely happy, and that invited them all to come to New Mexico territory to visit, which they filed as a future possibility with great interest. It was in June of 1876 that Inez told him she was expecting a child. She told him in the evening after supper, standing in the kitchen while he was drying the plates, and he set down the plate he was holding and turned to look at her, and she was watching him with that steady, waiting expression, the one that was measuring the response. He crossed the kitchen and took her face in both hands and kissed her forehead and then her cheek and then her mouth, and she made a small sound that was not quite a word. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his voice lower than usual. "Somewhat uncertain in the mornings," she said. "Otherwise fine, better than fine." She paused. Are you glad?" He looked at her, at this woman who had come back from the edge of despair on nothing but will and who had chosen him as clearly and deliberately as she had ever chosen anything. "Inez," he said, "I am so glad I do not have the words for it." She pressed her face briefly against his shoulder, and he held her there in the kitchen, and through the window the Texas evening was turning gold. Clara received the information about the coming baby with the gravity of a senior official being briefed on a significant development. She had several questions about the logistical arrangements, specifically about sleeping accommodations and whether the baby would require use of any of her personal possessions, and once these questions were addressed to her satisfaction, she announced that she thought a brother would be educational. Educational, Samuel repeated. I have only ever been around girls, Clara said, with the authority of someone who has thought carefully about their own development. I think a brother would broaden my experience. We do not get to choose, Inez said. I know, Clara said. I am just saying it would be educational. The baby came in February of 1877, and he was a boy, which Clara received with academic satisfaction. They named him Henry James Conroy, for Samuel's father Henry and for Inez's father James, and he arrived in the world at about 3 in the morning with the immediate and comprehensive announcement of his own presence that newborns specialize in. The midwife who had been brought from town declared him excellent in all respects, and departed with the fee and some of Inez's preserved peach jam. Samuel sat in the chair by the bed holding his son while Inez slept, and Henry James Conroy looked up at him with the unfocused, serious gaze of a person who has just arrived somewhere and is still determining what they think of it. Samuel had not known that a person could contain this much feeling and remain standing upright. He thought he understood now why people became so unreliable in their conversation when they had children, why they wanted to tell you about it endlessly, because it was simply not containable. Clara came in at 5 in the morning, having been unable to sleep through the noise, and stood beside the chair and looked at her brother with an expression that was scientific and tender in equal measure. He is very small, she said. He will get bigger, Samuel said. How soon? She asked. Faster than you will believe, he said. Clara considered the baby for another moment. I think he has Mama's nose, she said. I think you are right, Samuel said. She looked at Samuel then with those serious inherited dark eyes. Are you happy? She asked. It was the straightforward, direct question of a child who had seen her family diminished and rebuilt, and who wanted to know clearly that this was real. He met her gaze as honestly as he knew how. Clara, he said, I am the happiest man in Millhaven, Texas, possibly the happiest man in the entire state. She looked at him for another moment, checking the statement, and then she nodded with the satisfaction of someone who has confirmed an important fact, and she pulled the footstool over and sat beside his chair and looked at her sleeping mother and her new brother and the firelight, and she said nothing more for a long time, and neither did he. The farm prospered through 1877 and into 1878. The combination of Samuel's ranching knowledge and Inez's meticulous approach to crop planning produced a diversified operation that was better positioned than most hill country farms to weather the variability of the Texas climate. When the summer of 1878 ran dry and several of their neighbors had poor harvests, the Conroy farm lost the cotton planting entirely, but kept the corn and the sweet potatoes, and the sorghum at acceptable yields, because Inez had been conservative with water usage through the spring, and had insisted on a rain collection system behind the barn that Samuel had built somewhat skeptically, and come to regard with great respect. You were right, he told her in August, looking at the water barrels that had made the difference. I know, she said, without any inflation. I was also right about the second well. They had been debating the second well for 2 years. He looked at her and she looked at him, and he said, all right. I will find the location, she said. I have been watching the vegetation patterns. She found the location, and she was right about the second well too, which came in good and sweet 30 feet down on the south side of the property. Gideon Walsh rode over when he heard about it, and declared himself impressed in a way that was entirely genuine underneath the exaggeration. Henry, who was a year and a half old by then, had become a solid and amiable person with Samuel's dark hair, and Inez's dark eyes, and a laugh that operated in the upper register of what human hearing could comfortably manage, the way toddler laughs often do. He was devoted to Cornelius the pony, and had to be physically redirected from the pasture on a regular basis, because his primary life goal appeared to be climbing into the horse pen. Clara maintained her position as senior family member with great authority, and managed Henry, with a calm competence that suggested she had missed her calling as an administrator of some kind. Inez taught Clara through that winter, the lessons growing more demanding as Clara's mind grew more demanding, and Samuel found himself sitting at the kitchen table some evenings helping with the arithmetic, which was more complex than he had originally anticipated, and which gave him a new respect for what Inez was doing every day. Clara was working through material that would have been considered advanced for most children in the state's formal schooling system, which in 1878 was still inconsistent in coverage and deeply uneven in quality. She should go to the academy in Austin, Inez said one evening after Clara had gone to bed, when she is old enough. Samuel looked up from the harness he was repairing. You think she is capable of it? I think she is more than capable of it, Inez said. I think the question is whether we can manage it financially. They talked about it carefully, the way they talked about everything serious, directly and practically, and they agreed that it was the plan and that they would save toward it, and that Clara would be informed of the plan so she could work with full knowledge of what was possible for her. The next morning Inez told Clara over breakfast, and Clara's expression went through astonishment and joy and then settled into something fierce and purposeful. I will be ready, Clara said. I know you will, Inez said. Samuel watched his wife tell his daughter that the world was within reach and thought about the woman he had found in the cornfield, too proud to ask for help, and how very far she had come, and how much of that distance had been hers alone to travel. He was glad he had been there to walk alongside some of it. He did not think it would have been a different outcome without him, not ultimately, because Inez Dawson was not the kind of person who ultimately failed. But he was glad to have been there. The winter of 1878 into 1879 was a quiet one domestically, though the world outside Millhaven was not quiet. The newspapers from Austin and San Antonio came through with news of the last major conflicts between the Texas Rangers and various indigenous groups. The long, brutal process of displacement that Samuel read about with discomfort, he did not try to minimize or rationalize. Inez read the same accounts and her response was more pointed. She had grown up in San Antonio knowing people who occupied multiple positions in those conflicts, whose families had been in Texas since before the Anglo settlers arrived, and she had no patience for the narratives that made the displacement sound inevitable or clean. It was not inevitable, she said one evening over the newspaper. It was chosen. There is a difference. I know, he said. Most people prefer not to see the difference, she said. Most people prefer not to see things that implicate them, he said. She looked at him across the table with approval. You understand history better than most people out here. I had a good education, he said, and I have been married to someone who does not let me get away with lazy thinking. She almost smiled. That is a diplomatic way to put it. I try, he said. In the spring of 1879, they took the trip to New Mexico Territory to see coal, which was an adventure of significant scope. The journey by wagon took 12 days each way with a stop in El Paso, and Henry, who was 2.5, treated the entire journey as a personal opportunity for discovery and investigation, and needed to be removed from the wagon wheels and the horse's harness and the cooking fire approximately 900 times. Clara, who was 12, was largely responsible for this removal operation, and performed it with the exhausted competence of someone who has been managing Henry Conroy for 2 years. Cole was living on a small cattle operation outside of Las Cruces with a partner named Eduardo Reyes, a quiet man from Chihuahua with good horses and a well-organized ranch, and he was clearly happy in a way that Samuel had not seen him be since before their father died. The two brothers sat up late talking on Cole's porch with the New Mexico sky enormous and star-filled above them, and Samuel told Cole everything about the past 5 years, the farm and the harvest and Inez and Clara and Henry and all of it, and Cole listened with the particular quality of listening that brothers do, catching the things underneath the words. You sound different, Cole said. How do I sound? Samuel asked. Like a man who knows what he is doing, Cole said. "Like a man who is where he is supposed to be." Samuel looked at the stars over New Mexico and thought about his farm and his family waiting in Las Cruces, and about the fence line in Millhaven where he had found everything he had not known he was looking for. "I am," he said. They came home in July, tanned and travel-tired, and full of the particular satisfaction of having gone somewhere significant and chosen to return. Henry came home speaking a considerable number of Spanish words he had learned from Eduardo, which Inez received with delight because she was able to respond to him in the same language, a fact that appeared to deeply surprise Henry and pleased him beyond all proportion. "I did not know you spoke Spanish," Samuel said. She looked at him. "My mother's first language," she said, with a slight tone that suggested he should have known this. "I grew up bilingual." "I would like to learn," he said. "That can be arranged," she said. "Clara and Henry will help you. You will find the instruction merciless." This proved to be entirely accurate. Henry in particular had no mercy for incorrect pronunciation, and would solemnly repeat words at Samuel until they were done right, which was instructive and humbling in equal measure. The Austin Academy letter came in the autumn of 1879 in response to Inez's inquiry. Clara was 12 and a half. The minimum age for admission was 14, and she had 2 years to prepare, which she began immediately with an intensity that impressed everyone and surprised no one. Inez structured her lessons around the Academy's published curriculum, and Clara attacked it with the systematic thoroughness she brought to everything. Samuel found her one November evening reading by the lamp after everyone else was in bed, a book on natural science that was considerably above what most 12-year-olds would have been assigned anywhere in Texas. He stood in the doorway watching her for a moment, this child who had called him by his name for years, and had slept on his arm and ridden Cornelius all over the property, and informed him on a dozen occasions that he was wrong about something, and been right at least 8 of those times. "You should be in bed," he said. "I need to finish this chapter," she said without looking up. "That is what everyone says," he said. She looked up at him over the book. "When I am a doctor," she said, "I will read as late as I need to." "When you are a doctor," he said, "you will also need to sleep." She considered this. "One more page," she said. 5 minutes, he said. 10, she said. 7, he said. She looked at him with her mother's eyes and said, "You are the most difficult negotiator I know." "I learned from your mother," he said. She ducked her head over her book to hide the smile, and he went back to bed smiling himself. Henry turned 3 in February of 1880 and became, if possible, an even more energetic and enthusiastic person than he had previously been. He had Samuel's height coming in early and Inez's cheekbones and his own very specific Henryness, which expressed itself primarily through an absolute conviction that every animal in the county was his personal friend, and every tool on the farm was a toy. Samuel taught him the names of things and the right way to handle them, and Henry listened with varying degrees of success, depending on how interesting the alternative appeared. Inez found out she was expecting again in the spring of 1880. She told him in the kitchen in the morning before Clara was up, while Henry was still asleep, and she said it quietly, and he crossed the kitchen and put his arms around her from behind and pressed his face into her hair. "How are you?" he said. "Glad," she said. "Tired already, but glad." "I will take on more of the outside work," he said. "You will not make me an invalid over being pregnant," she said. "I know," he said, "but you can let me carry things." A pause. "I suppose I can allow that." He held her there in the morning kitchen, and through the window the spring was greening everything in sight, and the horses were moving in the pasture, and somewhere Cornelius was making his opinions about breakfast known in the particular way of the extremely small and the completely unintimidated. This baby came in November, another boy, and they named him William Samuel Conroy. William for Inez's grandfather, whose name she had carried with her from San Antonio, and Samuel for his father, though when Samuel pointed out that giving the child his own name was perhaps overstating the case, Inez said that she had given the child his father's name because she was proud of his father, and that was the end of that particular conversation. William arrived with red-faced urgency, and settled into life with the immediate authority of someone who knows what he wants and intends to get it, which was not a surprise given who his parents were. He was a rounder, more sociable baby than Henry had been, with a broad, ready smile and an interest in everyone who came into his field of vision. And Rose Walsh, who had come to help after the birth, declared him the most charming infant she had encountered, and held him for approximately 3 hours while Inez slept. Clara was 13 when William was born, and she received him with elder sibling benevolence, and Henry at 3 inspected his new brother with the thoroughness of a livestock evaluator, and announced that William seemed fine and would probably be useful in a few years. This verdict was delivered with absolute seriousness and was largely accepted. The farm continued to grow and to stabilize in the years following. By 1882, the Conroy operation had expanded to include a significant cattle component, 12 head that grazed the back acreage and provided both milk income and beef income. And the crop yield had been consistent enough through 2 moderate drought years that they had reserves built up in a way that made Samuel feel something he had not felt since his early 20s, secure. Not comfortable in an indifferent way, but genuinely secure, the kind of security that lets you look forward with confidence. Clara left for Austin in September of 1882, just turned 15, the academy having been persuaded by the quality of her application, and the letter Inez wrote on her behalf that she was more than prepared. The day she left was a clear September morning, and they all went to see her off at the stagecoach stop in Millhaven. Henry, who was 5 with his hair plastered down for the occasion, and William, who was almost 2, and had no understanding of what was happening, but sensed the significance and was quiet in Samuel's arms. Clara embraced Henry first, and told him solemnly to take care of Cornelius and to listen to his parents, both of which she had reason to advise. Then she embraced Inez for a long time, the two of them standing in the road with their arms around each other, and Samuel could see Inez saying something into Clara's hair and Clara nodding into Inez's shoulder. Then Clara stepped back and looked at Samuel, and he looked at her, this young woman who had been 7 years old when he first met her, who had fallen asleep on his arm and argued with him about bedtime and ridden a small pony with an enormous name all over the Conroy property, and informed him on multiple occasions that he was wrong about things, and he felt the full accumulation of 8 years of love arrive all at once. "Study everything they offer," he said. "I intend to," she said. "Write us every week," he said. "Every week," she agreed. "And Clara," he stopped and tried to find the exact right thing. "You are going to be extraordinary." She looked at him with her mother's eyes and she said, "I know," and then she hugged him hard and brief and got on the stage coach. They stood in the road and watched the stage roll away, and Henry waved until it was out of sight. Inez stood beside Samuel with her shoulder against his arm, and when the stage was gone she exhaled slowly and he put his arm around her. "She is going to be fine," he said. "She is going to be more than fine," Inez said. "She is going to do things we cannot imagine." "I believe that," he said. "So do I," she said. They drove home in the wagon through the September morning, Henry chattering about Cornelius and William asleep against Inez's side, and the land around them was golden and familiar and entirely theirs, and the life they had built together was present in every familiar field and fence line, and the smell of their own well water and the sound of their own horses moving in the pasture. Samuel looked at Inez beside him on the wagon seat, the morning light on her face, older than the woman he had found in the cornfield but more fully herself, the years having clarified rather than diminished her, her dark hair threaded with a few silver strands she wore without any concern, her hands easy in her lap, her expression settled and warm. She felt him looking and turned and met his eyes. "What?" she said. "Nothing," he said. "Just looking." "You have been looking at me for 8 years," she said. "And you still look good," he said. She made the sound that was exasperation and amusement together, the one he had been making her make for most of a decade. "You are terrible," she said. "You married me," he said. "I did," she said. intentionally and with full information. And, he said, she looked at him with those steady dark eyes, and everything he had ever needed was in her expression. And I would do it again, she said, every morning over again without exception. He took her hand on the wagon seat and held it all the way home. The years of the 1880s settled around the Conroy farm the way good years do, with the quality of continuity, the sense of a life built on sound ground. Clara wrote every week, as promised, her letters filled with the urgency and excitement of a young mind discovering how much there was to know. She was top of her class by her second year, and the academy's administrators had written a letter to Inez expressing what Samuel privately thought was a well-deserved acknowledgement of the fact that they had admitted an exceptional student. Henry grew into a boy who combined Samuel's love of the land with a curiosity that was entirely his own. By 7, he knew the Latin names of the native plants along the creek and could read weather in the sky with an accuracy that impressed the adults who saw it. He was also still trying to climb into the horse pen at every available opportunity, which was apparently a permanent feature of his character. William at 5 was round-faced and cheerful and interested in everyone, the kind of child who made friends immediately and kept them indefinitely, with a gift for making people feel at ease that was his own talent and nobody else's. He followed Henry everywhere with a devotion that Henry tolerated with the particular grace of an older sibling who secretly enjoys the company. In 1884, Clara came home for the summer as a graduate of the academy and announced over the family dinner table, with the calm certainty of someone who has been building toward this for years, that she had been accepted to a medical program in Philadelphia. There were women in medicine by that time, not many but enough to constitute a path, and Clara had identified the path and was walking it with all the directness Inez had raised her to apply to everything. Inez looked at her eldest child across the table, and her expression was the fullest Samuel had ever seen it, every feeling she had held for 15 years of raising this girl present at once. "When do you leave?" Inez said. "October," Clara said. "I know it is far." "It is far," Inez said. "It is also right." She reached across the table and took Clara's hand. "Your grandmother could not go to school," she said. "I went to school but not far enough. You are going to Philadelphia. Do you understand what that is?" "Yes," Clara said, and her voice was steady but her eyes were bright. "Good," Inez said. "Then go." Clara left for Philadelphia in October of 1884, and the farewell at the stagecoach was different from the first one, fuller and sadder and more complete, because Philadelphia was not Austin. It was genuinely far, and they all understood that a distance like that meant a change in the shape of things. Henry, 9 years old, hugged his sister with a fierceness that showed he was feeling more than he was saying. William, 4, cried without shame or apology, which Clara received with great tenderness. Samuel watched Inez watch Clara go, and thought about all the things Inez had sacrificed and endured and built, and thought about how the truest measure of what they had made together was standing on a stage in traveling clothes going to become a doctor in Pennsylvania. That evening they sat on the porch in the October cool, and William was asleep, and Henry was in his room, and Samuel and Inez sat together in the evening quiet, and Inez leaned against him with the ease of a woman who has been doing this for 9 years and knows the shape of it by heart. "We did something good," she said. "We did several things good," he said. "Clara is the best one," she said. "Do not tell Henry that," he said. "Henry would agree with me," she said. "He worships his sister." He thought about this. "He does," he said. "He has good taste." She was quiet for a moment, the comfortable quiet. Then she said, "Are you happy, Samuel, truly?" He turned to look at her in the evening light. The question was honest and direct, the way she always was, and he held it with the seriousness it deserved. "I am," he said. "Every day, even the hard ones." He paused. "Especially the ones that start the way this one ended, with us sitting out here like this." She lifted her head from his shoulder and looked at him. "You found me in a cornfield," she said. "Not my finest moment." "It was my finest moment," he said. "I did not know that yet, but it was." She looked at him for a long moment with those eyes that had always seen clearly, that had measured him and found him worth keeping, and she cupped his face in her hand and kissed him, soft and sure, the kiss of two people who have learned each other by heart. When they separated, she stayed close, her forehead against his. "I love you," she said. "I have not said it enough today." "You said it this morning," he said. "Once is not enough," she said. "Then say it again," he said. "I love you," she said. "Samuel Conroy. I love you, and I am glad you came over that fence, and I am glad you said the corn was your excess, which I knew even then was not entirely true." He laughed, low and warm. "It was mostly true. It was partially true," she said. "The rest was you. The rest was you," he said. "You were the reason." She settled back against him on the porch, and above them the Texas sky was doing everything it knew how to do with October stars, which was considerable. The farm was quiet and full and good. The horses in the pasture and the cattle in the back field and their boys asleep inside, and their daughter on her way to a life that had been built from scratch by a woman in a cornfield who refused to stop. And Samuel Conroy sat on his porch with his wife against his side and thought about the stone fence between two properties and the morning that had changed everything. And he felt the full weight and the full rightness of the life he was in. This specific life, these specific people, this piece of Texas hill country that knew his boots by now and held everything he loved. He had offered a neighbor his harvest. He had not expected to end up with everything. He was grateful every single day for the miscalculation. Clara wrote from Philadelphia in December of that year, a long letter full of anatomy and wonder, and the specific joy of someone who has found exactly the thing they are supposed to be doing. She wrote that her professors had said she was remarkable, and she wrote it without false modesty, because Inez had raised her to be honest about what she knew. And she wrote that she thought about home every day, and that she would be back in the summers, and that she loved them all, including Henry's ongoing conflict with the horse-pen fence and William's apparently legendary charm. Inez read the letter at the kitchen table with Samuel across from her, and when she finished she folded it carefully and set it down and pressed both hands flat on the table and looked at the grain of the wood for a moment. "She is going to be a doctor," she said quietly, as though saying it out loud was necessary to make it fully real. "She is," he said. "My mother never learned to read," Inez said. He reached across the table and covered her hands with his. She looked up at him and her eyes were bright and steady and sure. "We did it," she said. "All of it, we really did." "You did it," he said. "I was just grateful to be alongside." "No," she said firmly. "We, every bit of it was we." He held her hands across the kitchen table, and outside the Texas winter was cold and clear, and the stars were out, and the farm was sleeping, and everything they had made together was real and permanent and good. He would tell her again tomorrow that he loved her. He would tell her in the morning over coffee, and in the evening after supper, and in the small quiet moments that accumulated into a life. He would work beside her and argue with her and learn from her and be learned from. And they would raise Henry, who wanted to know the name of every plant, and William, who wanted to be friends with everyone. And they would read Clara's letters from Philadelphia. And one day they would see her come home with a medical certificate and stand in the kitchen of the house where they had built everything, and know that it had all been worth every hard day. He would show Henry how to read the Southfield soil, and Henry would show him things he had not known about the creek watershed in return. He would teach William to ride, and William would exceed all reasonable expectations for charm on horseback. The farm would have good years and lean years, and they would manage both the same way they managed everything, together and directly, and without pretending the hard things were not hard. And on an ordinary evening 30 years from that first October morning, Samuel Conroy would sit on his porch with Inez beside him as they had sat 1,000 times, and the stone fence between two properties that had never quite been finished would still be there, and he would look at it and feel only a complete and unhurried gratitude for the day he had climbed it. He had gone looking for a lost piece of fence line. He had found Inez Dawson in a cornfield. He had offered her what he had to spare. and in doing so, had received everything a man could possibly need, and more than that, and enough to carry for the rest of his life and still have plenty left over. The south field grew green every spring. The turquoise ring stayed on her finger. And the life they had made together, which had begun with a harvest shared across a fence line, continued and deepened and grew the way good things do when you tend them right, with patience and honesty, and the kind of love that does not make a great noise about itself, but simply shows up every morning and does the work.